Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final session in our great Occupier Developer Office debate. This session we are looking at matching supply and demand. I'm Claire Reddy. I'm head of construction here at Lewis Silkin and a partner in the real estate team. We're jointly hosting these sessions with Hennigan Consulting Group, and Steve Wright, who is a senior consultant at Hennigan, is joining me as joint chair for this final session. Really pleased to introduce another great panel for this one. We have Tahira Hammond. Tahira is Global Head of Workplace for 91. Tahira's background has consistently focused on creating the emotional connection between people and places, and the premise on which design and delivery of a recent head office relocation in London was completed and set out to be an experiential destination. We also have Simon Tan. Simon is an equity partner and head of offices at Levy Real Estate. Levy is a London-centric commercial property agent. Simon brings to our discussion today 30 years of advisory experience in central London. He advises a number of key central London landlords, including the Crown Estate, and has advised on and leased a number of landmark office developments in central London, including the 550,000 square foot Cardinal Place in Victoria. Simon also advises a number of occupier clients on their real estate strategies and is currently handling his own company's office relocation. Good luck with that, Simon. Gayatri Kunaraman is a director with the Occupier Solutions Group at Avison Young. Gayatri works with global occupier clients across EMEA, particularly within the tech sector. We also have Sudhir Sahidharan, who is the Director of Workplace Experience and Future Working at Tetra Pak. Sudhir is leading a cross-collaborative project with HR, global information management, brand, occupational health and safety, customer experience to understand the workplace experience of the future and how would hybrid working work. A few housekeeping issues for you to address or familiarise yourselves with while I set the scene for today's discussion. First of all, the session is being recorded and will be sent out afterwards. If you don't want to appear in the recording, please do turn off your video camera. Please put yourselves on mute while others are speaking. And if you have a question, you can use the chat function, and Steve and I will be picking up those questions both as we go along and at the end of the session. As with the previous two sessions, we'll run for about an hour, and then for about half an hour there will be the opportunity to stay and to chat and to ask further questions and really take the discussion on. In our first session, our occupier panel looked at the occupiers' requirements once we're all back to the office in a meaningful way. We looked at wellness, sustainability, flexibility was key. The second session saw our landlords and developers talk about good practice in these areas, looking, for example, at net zero, at placemaking, and the landlord's role in making all of this happen. Today, we're going to try and pull some of those strands and those earlier discussions together. We have occupiers and a landlord representative in Simon on our panel today. We need to mesh it together. We need to make it work. So we're going to be talking about lease terms, in terms of flexibility, the possibility of shorter terms, space sharing, the impact of that on valuation, the problem of and possible solutions for secondary and tertiary stock, areas and buildings. In our second session, landlords, developers such as Argent and Lendlease talked about their schemes where they're able to really curate the experience for those occupying and moving through the developments, that's much more difficult for a landlord or an occupier of a single building. And then finally, we're going to talk about some change management issues. Steve, can I hand over to you at this point on landlord terms, please?
I certainly can. Thank you very much, Claire, for that great introduction. Welcome to everyone. It's lovely to see a number of familiar faces who've been with us for the first two sessions as well, coming back for their final instalment today. So thank you all for joining us. We have certainly learnt a lot in sessions 1 and 2. I think for me, probably session 1, because I work a lot with occupiers, didn't provide me with that many surprises, but I was very delighted to hear from our landlord panel in session 2 about how aligned the thinking is already with making sure that the product is right for what occupiers are actually looking for. However, one of the key things that we do find ourselves at the moment is a crossroads. We are at a certain point in time. We are nearing, all of us on different dates, the return to the workplace, not the return to work, but the return to the actual workplace, which is going to be phase 1 of getting people back into the space. And from my own thinking as a workplace strategist, I believe that that's the start of the learning period, to see where everything does settle down and how people are going to work going forward and what people are really going to want. So how's that going to work with the lease terms and a point?
Steve, you've gone on to mute.
Don't know how I managed that. Sorry, thank you for pointing it out. So I was just saying, how's that going to affect our lease terms? How are occupiers going to be looking at the market? Will they need to ring fence their exit strategy at the more robustly at the beginning of taking on a new lease? Will it be a shorter term model similar to what we see on the continent? Is that going to be acceptable to landlords? What's going to be the impact on valuations and how are those questions going to be addressed? Tahira, I'm going to come to you first on this point, if I may, because I know you've just gone through this pain curve very recently. So would you like to open up with your thoughts on this and we'll move around the panel as we go? Thank you.
Sure, Steve, happy to, and thank you for having me on today. So I guess for us it has varied. I'm kind of fortunate to be able to have locations globally, and pre-pandemic, I would say, where we had the shorter terms, I would find myself thinking, gosh, this is a pain, a lot of work, a lot of challenge, a lot of investment for a very short period of time. We should be doing this to kind of make it work for a longer period of time. And I guess the question is, has my view changed now that the pandemic has happened? The honest answer is, I guess, in terms of what we did for London, so it was a long lease. It absolutely has worked in terms of giving us certainty of our space, knowing that actually the decisions we made are for the long term. And actually any enhancements, renovations or investments that we did will continue to be with us for the longer period. And I guess, you know, from a, oh goodness, do I want to be looking at this again in 5 years' time because the lease term is about to exit? Actually, for a larger location, I would say the appetite is probably less. So I wonder whether the answer will be depending on the size of the location you've got. That may then determine actually how often you want to be changing and how short or longer your leases are going to be.
That's a very interesting point in terms of looking at the size of organisation that you are, I guess. And yes, obviously more sizable implications with the bigger the building, and not quite so easy to flex unless you start to drop floors and sublet in the way that your lease may be constructed. But Sudhir, could I come to you next on that? What are your thoughts?
Yes, and thank you all for having me as well. We know there is going to be a shift. There is going to be a change of some sort in the future, and we still need to figure out how that's going to happen. But I think if you look at what we are trying to look at in our leases as well, is trying to see how there could be some kind of flexibility in the lease, some kind of flexibility for maybe a shorter term that could happen in the future, or for subleasing as well. But I think also another important aspect could be how you could share spaces with someone else and have shared amenities as well, because that allows you to use space differently. So yes, flexibility in the lease, in giving back or not, as well as having other shared neighbors or occupiers along with you. and the fact for subleasing as well. I think those are the main areas of leases where we would look, purely because we don't know. Like you mentioned before as well, we are all in a large global petri dish. We really need to figure this out, and no one really knows what it's going to be like.
I like that description, the large global petri dish. I've never heard it put that way. I mean, is this something you think, Sudhir? I mean, looking at, I suppose, a term that's being bandied around the market an awful lot at the moment in terms of the occupier sector is the bell curve, and it's the bell curve as applied to the week. The lower ends of the bell curve are on Mondays and Fridays when people are saying they don't really want to be in the office, and peak occupancy is going to be coming in, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If that was to be shifted and the bell curve was adjusted a bit, is it where maybe people, if they were going to be working a reduced week, could share with another organisation or maybe another division to accomplish that space reduction requirement?
With Tahira and I had a chat about that as well, where you can't really change, or this is Tahira's words as well, that you can't really change the bell curve. It's not that it's going to go away, but I think there could be some kind of ways in which it could change. It could be a bit more flattened, but it's not going to go, and we have to accept that that's what it's going to be and work towards that. However, there are ways in which it could work across, and that could be through community building. Of course, trying to understand when do we want employees to come in, what can you have on those certain days to bring them in. And the other one would be, of course, of sharing as well, where you could have, if you are having Wednesdays and Thursdays, you could also use some other shared spaces. That's where the shared amenities come into play as well, because they become spillover spaces for all of this together.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And that shared amenity, I think, is really where we're going to start to see the value of fit out and office space having to prove itself as being effective going forward. So
I agree, Steve, and that's exactly what we've done with our London location. So actually, you mentioned about subletting. So for our project that we finally finished last year, we did take the whole building, and there was surplus space in there. So we are head landlord. Yes, we are landlord as well as main occupier, and we've sublet some space, and that's how we've built in flexibility for us, hopefully to expand into rather than contract, as the time comes, and then liaise with our subtenants in terms of what leases they're looking at and how they can also build in, and actually I think there's a real mutual appreciation and respect that just as we're considering expansion and contraction and flexibility, so will other occupiers, and how can we work together in partnership to make sure it's a win-win for everybody.
And we can see the investment in yours, having been to your building. It's very beautiful space, and obviously it has a great attraction factor, so it's not going to be difficult for you, and also locationally to sublet. So I can see already that you've gone some way in terms of the thinking towards achieving that, Tahira.
And I think that's a key point that we are, I feel very fortunate kind of with this pandemic that when, for our staff coming back, they are coming back to a beautiful building. But I guess for where the building's a little bit tired and need a little bit of work, what can occupiers and landlords be doing to make them attractive?
A bit more of a catch up there, perhaps. Yeah. Gayatri, can we come to you next and let you have your 5 minutes on this one?
Yeah, sure. So my take is, I like the analogy that Sudhir put forward in terms of the petri dish that we've been in. But I do think the reality is that this push and pull between the occupier and the landlord's been there in the market for some time now. So, occupiers have been looking for more agility and flexibility in their leases, and not just in terms of their leases, but they want to be able to either scale up or scale down or reconfigure. They want to personalize their spaces. They want more amenities. They want services. They also want to be, I saw the first series and Mary Louise said sustainable, connected and accessible spaces. And then meeting their ESG criteria, their D&I criteria, everything that ticks their boxes in terms of talent attraction and retention. So this has possibly been accelerated by the fact that we've been in this petri dish and we've been working in different ways enabled by technology. But there is also the whole question about, the way we do work is changing. There's a lot of automation, there's AI, there's different kinds of work that's being done at the moment. There's different ways people interact with each other in an office space. So the flexibility that the occupier is looking for stems systemically from the fact that they can't really foresee what it's going to look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, because the digital transformation is is going at breakneck speed. So this has been in play for a while now. So this is not a new problem that we've woken up to post the pandemic. And I think more and more, especially with the ESG criteria, the climate change crisis, and everything, the pledges that we've signed up to, and we have to meet, both developers, landlords, and occupiers. People are realizing that there needs to be some intervention at this point and some give and take.
Thank you. And I think you make a very valid point there in terms of the acceleration. If we look at that acceleration, we've probably, in my opinion, I think we've seen a minimum of 5 years acceleration of our use and acceptance of the technologies that already existed. We wouldn't be doing this in a 2D pixelated forum, if not for that. And I think that is the kind of new contract, but there's also the other things which are implicit in that, which is the basis of trust that people can actually work and will work remotely. So the very nature of work itself is shifting, and how that's going to play back into the market. So I think that this does take us back into how landlords are really responding to this, which gives me a perfect segue into Simon for you to come in and have a bit of a comment on it. Simon, last time round we did hear from our landlord panel that the occupier agenda is very high on their own agenda in terms of creating those pull factors and the attraction factors, not just in terms of placemaking, but in terms of obviously getting their buildings filled. How are these things playing out for you in terms of the thought processes that you're seeing in the landlord sector and the investor sector?
Yeah, I think the customer is completely the business model for landlords today, and I think as far as lease length is concerned, it's very interesting. I mean, we had a historic long lease model in this country, which has underpinned the investment market for some time, which was say 25 years, and that then became 15, and then it became 10. But I don't think that the lease length pattern that we've had is completely driven by landlords and the investment market. I think it's I think if you look at occupiers, it's often been a function of size, and we've seen larger occupiers requesting fairly significant lengths of leases. Now, I guess occupiers in an ideal world would have a reasonably long lease with complete flexibility to exit at any one point in time, but that would obviously have to come at a price. But I think if you're a significant occupier and you're taking space for your workforce, you are making a substantial commitment. There's a huge not just the initial fit out, but the level of investment that goes into those offices, and obviously occupiers need to write that investment off over a certain period of time. So the shorter commitment you make, the harder that becomes, and I think that's often an issue for occupiers. I think we are seeing a lot of change at the moment, and I think we're in a period of flux where there's a particular polarization on shorter commitments, because a lot of occupiers simply don't know what their long-term plan is at the moment. There's so much change going on, and things are very fast moving. So I think it's probably slightly exaggerated the natural situation, but I think we're going to see a lot of change. I think one of the issues with the traditional long lease model is the 5-year upward only rent review that goes along with that. And I think there's a lot more being done by landlords, I think, in terms of being more creative and finding different ways of dealing with pricing, and actually working with their customers to actually give them something that they want. I think you're seeing people sharing spaces with other people as ways of flexing their own needs, and actually bringing other partner companies into their headquarters, which again historically was something that was always resisted, but is going to become a lot more of the norm. So I think I don't think the traditional lease, if you like, model is completely dead. I think what you'll see is landlords creating buildings of such quality and environments that are so good that actually they'll become more relaxed about the lease lengths themselves, because they'll realise they've got such a good product that if a tenant does move on, go somewhere else, they're confident that they can relet that space to a new customer. So I think that in part is where things will get to, but you'll see that obviously done at the top end of the market, but there will be obsolescence in other areas where those buildings can't easily be relet.
Thank you, Simon. And that, you've just left us on a perfect segue back to Claire, actually, who's going to come in with question 2 for our panel, which is basically on that exact subject. So Claire, I'm going to pass you the ball back.
Thank you. It was indeed the perfect segue, and certainly in our last session we had landlords, developers who are creating space so good that people aren't going to want to leave, but we did recognise the fact that there is a lot of secondary and tertiary space out there that isn't built, designed to the best sustainability standards, isn't going to easily provide the wellness space. And one of the questions that I posed to our panelists earlier this week was, what are the key changes that landlords of those spaces can make to make their space more attractive to occupiers? So Simon, if we can turn to you first on that one, please.
Yeah, I think what was obviously there's an issue here in that when you're building new build product or creating a new estate, you have the opportunity to provide everything that the customer's going to require, and I think the issue then becomes bigger for existing buildings and refurbishments and the repurposing of space that's already there. But I think we are starting to see people being a lot more creative. I mean, you don't necessarily need to be an estate landlord or a major developer to provide the right environment for your occupiers, and we're starting to see off-site facilities being provided, for example, in a building that can't actually provide everything that everyone needs. We're perhaps seeing something that's provided off-site in terms of green space, or in terms of meeting space, or in terms of cycle storage, or whatever it is that those occupiers want. And the clever landlords are starting to realise, well, actually, if these people can't become part of our community, they're benefiting from way more than just a piece of office space and an immediate working environment. They're benefiting from joining community, and then perhaps they might meet people from a different, other occupiers of that same community as well, and the whole thing then starts to really work. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that. I mean, in a simple example, if a building which has no outside space but suddenly provides a rooftop garden that can be enjoyed by everyone that occupies that building, and then the basement's got a nice shower and cycle facility. So suddenly, even on a relatively ordinary building, suddenly they've got an environment which everyone is warming to and everyone's enjoying. And I think we're starting to see a lot more of that, rather than just particular features within the office space itself. I think it's thinking outside of the space itself and actually the environment that's around it.
So certainly the landlord as service provider was something that came up in our second session, and Tahira, when we spoke a couple of days ago, you told us that actually as a sort of a landlord yourselves, you're actually quite generous with your space and providing that experiential approach that perhaps smaller occupiers can't afford.
Absolutely. I guess the benefit, we've created an office space that's for our staff to enjoy, but actually it's in the building, and why doesn't everybody enjoy it? So for us, as a non-traditional landlord, but we have become one, our subtenants are getting to use a gym, great shower, basement facilities with great parking, and all the facilities come with that. And then we've kind of extended it a little bit, just in little touches in terms of a complimentary towel service, hair dryer and hair straightener, for those of us that need it after we've had a workout. That's assuming you work out. And so there's just the little touches, and I think it's that. But we're very definitely, it's in the building. We're not precious about it. It's obviously there for our staff to use, but actually for our subtenants as well, because anybody who walks in through our doors should have a great experience. You know, for the, you know, whether that's then somebody coming for an interview, whether that's a subtenant, whether that's my family popping in for some lunch with me, whatever it may be. And it's going back to the introduction you give me, Claire, in terms of that emotional connection between people and places. You just don't know where your next conversation, connection, network, anything is going to come from. But certainly for us, one thing we can control is how people feel when they come into our building.
And sort of going back onto that question about the change that a landlord could make, would that be it for you to provide that service, or is there anything else that the landlord could provide, could change?
Yeah, I mean there is. I mean, look, I guess taking the gym as an example, if that was already in the building, that would have been very attractive to us. But for me, I think the landlord thing, and it's mentioned in the guise of partnership, is that relationship. For me, having a landlord who actually has someone there who maybe was previously a corporate occupier, so really understands it from my side. Because I think that's the benefit that my subtenants have got, is that actually I am a corporate occupier as well as their landlord. And so I really get it from their point of view as well. So I think for a landlord, if they were to have a team of people, you know, you've got your transactions and you've got all that, but actually part of their team that they're putting forward to talk to occupiers should be someone, I think, who was previously an occupier.
Thank you. Gayatri, in terms of looking at what these landlords can do, I know one of the things that you had talked about previously was around the public sector already assessing the sustainability of their stock across the country. Would that be it for you, or is there something else that you think could make a more crucial difference?
Well, I think there are lots of options that we could, or scenarios we could possibly consider here, because if you're looking at if you're looking at stock which is in more attractive places, then that's not going to be very difficult to lease out. But if you're looking at secondary stock or with high vacancy rates that are probably not in that, you know, that accessible or that attractive locations, then there is an option to see how in some cases they could be redeveloped. Like you said, I mean, in response to COP26 in Glasgow, we've just recently announced more aggressive targets in terms of reducing our carbon emissions, and this is by 2035. So there is going to be some kind of natural point of intervention where we'll be looking at our assets and seeing, you know, what is our carbon footprint and how can we how do we map out our pathways to net zero carbon by the dates that, you know, we have to meet our pledges. So there is going to be that kind of intervention in any case, which may tick that box in terms of sustainability. But then there are also options to, for example, repurpose some of those space into alternate uses, like Simon was mentioning, like there's senior living, there's co-working, there's mixed use space. The millennials who are coming into the market work, live, play in a different way. They want spaces where they can be some co-living, some working, almost like a Citizen M hotel, if you will, where, you know, the actual room's quite small, but the common areas are quite big, the amenities are good, and you can plug in and work. So spaces like that. And then there's also a lot of prop tech in the market that's actually marketing and positioning those kind of secondary stock. And they help them, like the breathers and the liquid spaces of the world, that make those spaces more attractive and look at it from a different point of view, attracting a different kind of tenant to it. So there is that. But then there's also technology, and I bring technology in all the time because I think that is going to be the major factor that drives the change. There is the smart mobility, there's the micro mobilities, there's the scooters. So some of these less accessible spaces are suddenly going to be more accessible. For example, as soon as electric vehicles are more common on the roads, you know, reaching some of these locations, it's going to be easier for tenants. So in the natural kind of development of technology, some of these locations where the stock is could be more attractive. And then, I mean, Tahira very kindly pointed out the square mile development by, that the City of London announced just a couple of days back. And that in itself is looking at transport infrastructure, it's looking at green spaces, it's looking at amenities, even interventions and partnerships from the government can actually upgrade some of these spaces and make it more attractive, I think.
Although I think the City of London is also, isn't it, looking at changing some of their office space into 1,500 new residential units. So at the same time as we see the high street becoming resi, we'll also see offices becoming resi. And I know we've got a number of architects on the call today, and a number of them are not desperately complimentary about the quality of design when office is turned into resi. So it'll be interesting to hear some of the comments around that. Sudhir, what would be your major change that a landlord of secondary or tertiary space could make to get Tetra Pak in?
I think I would steal with pride what Simon had to say is about customer and how you look at a customer, and I would change the word customer to a human. Because I think now with us being in the pandemic the way we are, I think we've gone back to understanding our real human feelings. Those little joys that we get to stop and smell the roses, which we didn't do before, we do it now. We stop and look at the sky, which we never did before, we do it now. How can we recreate those little drops of joy in our spaces to get our people back? And that could be just having a partnership with an ice cream truck on a nice sunny day. I mean, it's as simple as that. Who doesn't like it? I mean, of course, someone may not want it, but who doesn't like it? But those little things, they make so much of a difference. It's very much related to what Tahira was saying about a towel. I mean, just the fact that I have a towel at my gym means that I will actually, it may be an additional reason for me to go to the gym, which I may not have had before. So it's those little things that make such a big difference, which will help us come back. But there are some things also which we can focus on, which we have learned, and it's not going to change, or it's just going to get accelerated, is our need for health and wellness. We have started looking at it with a far more greater lens, magnifying lens than we did before. And how could we actually have that? And that can happen through really easy methods. What if we numbered our stairs and it told you how many miles you walked if you walked from one floor to the next, and you kept doing that 5 times, and that's connected to your Fitbit? Now, these are very simple things to do. They are not complicated. They are just creative and just get it done. I mean, it's as simple as that, which could happen. And the other part is sustainability. I guess we have all understood that the world, that we are part of a larger world, that we are not individual. We may be selfish. We've always been selfish. We will continue being, but we have known that we don't exist individually. We exist because of a lot of other things. And that's why the planet is so important for us going forward. How can we actually bring that in? Could it be with just biodiversity? Could it be with the kind of food we are offering? Could it be by talking about organic food, by food miles? Just the fact that you put food miles up and say where the food came from changes everything. I mean, you want to then go there. The fact that it's from a local farm, or it's farm poached eggs, or whatever it could be, right? It helps you want to do that, and that's what's going to draw you back. But so coming back, those little drops of heaven, right? That if we can get that in, that's what's going to work for us.
Sudhir, if I just, sorry, Clay, if I can just add to what Sudhir said there, actually, so it's quite funny, but I was talking to a couple of my service providers this morning. So it's my gym provider and my catering. And I said to them, the thing that will give me the greatest joy is if I came up to get a cup of tea and I saw the two of you concocting a plan on how you're going to do joint collaboration on what my staff are going to experience. And it's exactly what you just said there.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll be very reassuring for a number of landlords of those spaces to hear that actually little drops of heaven, I love that phrase, can be just as much a catalyst, a change to attract people as the very expensive retrofitting of sustainability measures to up onto wellness standards, etc. But I know one of the things that I asked Nick Searle in the last session was whether landlords could charge additional rent for a more sustainable building. In our first session, we talked about this divergence of the grade A space and the secondary and tertiary market. And Nick's response, and I know Nick's on the call, so Nick, I'm sure you'll tell me if I misquote you on this. I think it was along the lines of, can we afford not to make space more sustainable? It's not about doing it to charge more rent. It's the fact that we have to do it for so many different reasons, not just for the purpose of attracting talent. I know the first time I spoke with Gayatri, she was talking to me about when she started out in business, that the then millennials would be terribly excited about working for McKinsey, for example. But if all of a sudden McKinsey doesn't have a particularly sustainable building in 2021, our new millennials may well turn around and say, well, McKinsey may be great, but your building isn't very sustainable, so I'm going to go and work for the startup around the corner who's got a sustainable space and meets all of my values. One of the things that a number of people have mentioned, and Gayatri, you were talking about Breather. I've not come across Breather, but certainly there are a number of other platforms that I've seen. My understanding is that those platforms tend to look at the more affordable space. And of course, that's great. We then have the grade A space, which is super and very attractive, and people are paying a premium for it. We have the affordable space, which is on the tech platforms, and people who are really looking for value for money are picking that up. What do we do about that mid-market space that is more expensive? It's not cheap, but nor is it sustainable, and nor is it really as attractive as a Lend-Lease or an Argent new development that is perhaps net zero carbon. Simon, is that something that you perhaps want to come in on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're right. I mean, and I agree with Nick's comment that this isn't a choice in terms of the sustainability and well-being agenda. It's essential. So rather than necessarily see it as a premium, I think you're going to see space that isn't up to the mark being discounted. And you touch on, it's very interesting where we're seeing demand at the moment. We're seeing demand at the top end for the buildings that provide absolutely everything. We're seeing demand at the value end, and value doesn't necessarily mean inferior quality. It might be a value location, a suburban location. It might be brand new space in a suburban location that offers better value for money. It might be something that's just simple in terms of specifications. So we're seeing demand there. And you're right, there's then a middle ground. I think one of the interesting things we've seen, possibly accelerated by the co-working and serviced market, is the advent of landlord fitted and furnished space. And we're finding that's the third element at the moment, which is very much in demand. So, that is a potential solution for some landlords for some space which perhaps doesn't fit at the two ends of the spectrum. And actually, it's all about, in that instance, it's all about offering greater lease flexibility, but also offering a product that's telecoms ready, that's furnished, that's quick and easy. The occupier doesn't have to worry about the lease lengths and fit out costs because it's already fitted out and furnished, so they can walk in and out. And it's quite a popular short-term solution at the moment in the current environment, where we're finding people are slightly uncertain as to what their long-term plans are. So the idea for a lot of occupiers of going into something like that for a year or two, and then doing something perhaps longer term, I think is one of the solutions, because I think the days of letting very bland, mid-priced, unfurnished, unready to occupy space are basically over now. I think it's just there's too much choice out there, and the occupiers are too discerning to walk into something that's overpriced and compromised. So I think that those are certainly the three areas where we're seeing most of the interest at the moment.
If I could just add on to that as well, from a different perspective as well, when you spoke about sustainability, there's always a question about sustainability equates price, or we need to really invest a lot to actually make something sustainable. But there's another way of looking at it as well, where sustainability can also be without actually investing so much of money as well. Because what is sustainability? Is it you have a full spectrum of how much you want to make it sustainable to how much you can actually be as well. There are ways in which, and I feel the way to do that is partnerships, is where you can bring in sustainability through smaller acts as well. And those acts could be sustainability through social endeavors as well. You could have artists coming in, you can have classical musicians playing there, you can have where your food is coming from, you can do many more things which does not have to be that expensive, and it will still relate to those millennials we're talking about. I mean, it relates to all of us as well. So it's just to say that sustainability does not equate money. Sustainability is a mindset. And if we can do those things of making sure we segregate our waste, and we're talking about it, making sure that the landlord has waste segregated and that's going correctly somewhere as well. Those are things which it's not expensive, but it makes a big difference on how someone perceives it and takes it back home and does it at home as well. So just trying to add on that value can be looked at from this perspective as well.
That answers beautifully, actually. One of the challenges that was posed, I think it might have been in the first session, around we have a problem in the UK in that people look at sustainability at the point of signing a lease. My property colleagues draft, negotiate green leases from time to time, but then they get put in the drawer, and nobody really thinks about how landlords and tenants can work together on sustainability during the term of the lease. And Sudhir, those points that you make tie in beautifully to that, but also very nicely to the idea of areas and buildings, and that, if you are a large landlord with an estate in the same area, you can curate that area to provide those experiences, to make sure that the gym next door provides towels, to make sure that you have the public realm that you need. If you are a landlord of a single building, or indeed an occupier of a single building, you don't have that luxury. One of the things that you've talked about a lot, Sudhir, over the last few days is around partnering with different people. I'm not sure whether it was you or Tahira who'd mentioned to me about, for example, helping to flatten the bell curve by bringing in the free ice creams on a Monday. One of my clients, who's a hotel developer, is very concerned at the moment about this idea that landlords are all going to be putting cafes, putting gyms, putting whatever into their building to keep their people inside their building, and the impact of that on the local community. What does the fabulous vegetarian cafe up the road do if actually there's a heavily subsidized cafe in the building next door, and so they lose all of those people that they're desperately trying to encourage back into London over the past 13 months? Tahira, do you have an input on that?
I mean, it is a concern, and I guess just generally for the F&B and hospitality industry in lots of places at the moment, they need all the support they can get, and one way potentially is for them to be partnering with maybe some of that secondary and tertiary stock, so that together they do the placemaking together, so that and that's where they can then compete with organizations or buildings that have got things inside the building. It's going back to Simon's point earlier about making the external space so good as well, where you then but you've got to be able to partner, because I guess you just haven't got the resource or the manpower or the capital to be able to do it on your own. But if you do partner with somebody who is aligned in your thinking that together we can do placemaking, together we can give experiences, not only are you then making it an attractive proposition for occupiers in that building, but you're also supporting hopefully some of these F&B industries that need some custom.
Gayatri, one of the things that we talked about in the second session was around people like Lendlease, for example, developing apps so that they could share information about discounts, whether it's just available to their community or whether it's available generally, so that occupiers know what's happening. Is that something that any of your clients have looked at?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all the big tech clients who are kind of anchor occupiers in some of the buildings, they always have employee apps that, you know, give them access to not just space booking and wayfinding, but also concierge services, being able to book, you know, order your coffee, and then you'd have partnerships, like Tahira said, with the F&B establishments around the building, so you have discounts on offer. And I do believe that this is going to be a big pull in terms of bringing people back to the office. That because what people are missing is that sense of connection and community, and giving them these offers, whether that's through your office manager or through an app, but forging those relationships with those establishments around you to be able to do that. And if it's in an app, it's an easy way to do it. That would be the best way, you know, to bring people back in. Incidentally, I used to work in the Shard before I moved to Gresham Street at Avis and Young. And for a very long time, all the occupants of the Shard had an employee app that gave them discounts across all kinds of retail and F&B outlets in London Bridge. And that was definitely a pull and a reason to go back into the office, a 25% discount on sundowner drinks at the bar downstairs.
That does sound very attractive. Sudhir, do you have any experience of how to actually push those partnerships with the local community? You talk about having classical musicians, etc., coming into the building. Is that something that you've really pushed with your neighbours?
So what we would be looking at is artists. So we have looked at artists and how we could create artwork with our artists within our spaces as well. And that is something that we have done. But in my previous life, when I used to work for Lego, in the office that we were in Shanghai, it is this fabulous building in downtown Shanghai. It was almost every Tuesday during lunch, there used to be a concert that was organized in the lobby. And the space was voluminous, it was beautiful, and we actually were there during those times. And that was a major pull. I mean, it's just the fact that you could go in there and just sit and enjoy it. That was big, and that could also help in, Steve, your comment about the bell curve flattening. That could also help there as well. But yes, that is happening. I think it's just for us to make sure it can work. And that also talks about our social sustainability and us and reaching out to community, where musicians right now, I'm just taking that as an example, musicians right now do not have the opportunities which we can actually give them, and to bring all that back as well, to bring life back into the environment. So there are many such, I guess, creative ways in which people need to think and try and see how to flip this around. Another question you also asked, which you were talking about before, was about how do the high street F&Bs react if you have cafes in your spaces, right? You create it, but the best way would be if your cafe was in the space. Why would we go? It's a partnership where you have one of your kiosks here or a pop-up that keeps coming every other day. That's also something that could work with you. I mean, so it's not a competition, but it's doing this together.
Great idea, which I will pass on. Simon, just very briefly, because I know we've yet to talk about change management. Obviously, we have bids, but not everywhere. Do you see this as being something that really should be led by existing and new bids, or do you see this as being something rather more informal that landlords and occupiers could and should be pushing?
Yeah, I mean, in many kind of ways, it shouldn't need bids to get everyone behaving in the right way. But I think certainly there's a major role they can play in pulling people together in the right areas. I mean, I think what a lot of this does demonstrate is the value of the office being located in the right place. And I think if you look at the polarization in cities, the social aspect that people have been missing over the last year Part of that is partly coming back into your own office community and your colleagues and so on, but it's actually about just coming into an environment where you're meeting other people. You know, it's that walk across the bridge to the office and those, you know, chance meetings of people in the area. So I think a lot of people, you know, will want to come back because their office is located in an exciting place. And I think this is part of why you'll see the sell of coming back to the office being coming back to a vibrant city location or a nice suburban location that's nearer to where you might live. But I think if you look at the traditional kind of business park model, for example, where you used to drive your car, park it, sit in an office, and then go home again, you look at that now and think that kind of environment is a thing of the past. You know, so I think that where your office is located is very, very important for that social aspect. It's not just how easy it is to get to, how close it is to your clients. Are you near a community of other like-minded people where people want to go out and bump into other people at lunchtime. They don't necessarily, they've been working with their colleagues all morning. So, you know, I think it's balancing that environment, getting the environment right in and around your own workspace, but actually combining that with being in an area. You know, we're very lucky in London, for example, where there's just so much going on, because I think the comment I've had from a lot of people who've already come back to the office is that they just missed being in London. And being around that city, and the same can be said for cities all over the world. So I think it's a combination of what you can actually do and what you can control and what actually goes on, what's already there around you.
I think that's so true. I'm certainly looking forward to getting back to the office, and I'm fascinated to see how people are actually going to use it, which is a great point at which to hand over to Steve on the change management piece.
Thank you very much, Claire. Okay, well, we're moving into the final 5 minutes, so I'm going to go around the panel quite quickly to ask for 1 point each on this. But just before I do that, we will be taking questions. Those of us that are able to stay online from the panel, and Claire and myself, will be sticking around until 5:30. Tahira, I know you have to unfortunately leave us at 5, but thank you very much for taking part. We haven't heard the last from you yet. But do get the questions in. We will be taking the mics off mute as we go past 5 o'clock, so you will have the opportunity to interact directly with the panel. So do think of those questions now. Okay, on to the final part then, change management. What do we mean by change management? Not necessarily the change management you're going to see inside an occupier organisation, just in terms of moving desks around or whatever that happens to be, but change management may be on the larger scale. So is this going to mean changes to technology? Is it going to mean you need a new riser with a fibre connection in it? Will it mean certain other things that need to be accommodated within your building? But perhaps most importantly, if we go back to the point we started at and the proposition that I made at the beginning, which is we are going to continue to learn for the next 12 months, what is the best way that we can actually share that learning? How can we take that on in a partnership format with the landlords, between landlords and occupiers, to make sure that there's collaboration and the best outcome is achieved for everyone? And Tahira, I'm going to come to you first on that.
I think if I had to put things into 2 words, I think the first word would be flexibility. I think we need to be able to be agile in order to try and figure out if something is not going a certain way, how can we shift and change sooner rather than later? And that comes in everything that we are doing. So this is very, very high level. It goes into everything. It goes into the way we would do our leases and the way we want to have our employees back in the office, how we want to run our policies, how we want to create and curate our experiences. I think for all of it, I think flexibility and agility, the fact that we can pivot if we need to, because things are changing at such rapid paces, at least for the next few more months or maybe a year or two, I'm not sure, but that's the flexibility. And the other one would be partnership. I think we've spoken about it a couple of times right now in different ways as well. But I think partnership is where you can work with somebody else as well and have a win-win situation. And that can, again, happen in many ways. Is it working with someone? Is it collaborating with someone to have their services on site? Is it where they can actually sell their products on site and then the occupiers can just pay directly to them? There are a lot of different ways in which partnership can happen. And that is something we need to build on to help each other out. And that's something we have got, or we have learned over the year from the pandemic. We've all been helping each other out in small and big ways as well. And we can do it at a larger scale as occupiers and landlords as well.
Thank you, Sudhir. Tahira, I'm going to come to you next.
Sure. So I think in terms of partnership, just picking on what Sudhir said, I think a forum like this is a great start because you are getting people together. And there just needs to be more open dialogue like this. I think there needs to be a real spirit of honesty and with that partnership. You know, so both parties, you said we did, but actually if we got it wrong, let's say we got it wrong, and then we continue to try and get it right together. And then I would also say that in terms of how arrangements and agreements are put in place, and I guess just one best example I can give you is where a lot of well, I say a lot, I don't know if it's a lot, but where service provider contracts have changed from being performance-based to being vested contracts. So there's actually something for both in there, and actually that, so you actually go through the pain together, but you actually celebrate the success together. So make it a vested interest for all the parties, because once you've got that, you're all going to be pulling in the same direction.
Similar goals, great outcomes. Completely agree. Fantastic point. Thank you. Gayatri, I'm going to come to you now.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree with both Sudhir and Tahira. And I think, you know, we are coming out of this and going a little bit into the unknown. So we don't know how, I mean, we're talking about flexibility, hybrid workspaces. There's been strategies around what that's going to look like. We don't know yet how people, what the take-up is going to be, how people are going to be working 6 months from now. So my thinking, and a lot of my clients as well, is whatever they do, they're not doing anything in kind of reactive to the situation manner, but their strategies are going to be data-driven. So they will sit back, look at what the utilization is, what the patterns of working are, what is the data telling us, gain insights from that, and then build a more kind of strategy that's relevant for them and to their business.
Thank you. And I think I would echo that from my own perspective as a workplace strategist, is to act on the actual data. So you're building on informed decisions rather than speculatively at the moment. Probably very important in terms of financial conservation as well. Simon, I'm going to come to you for the final word on that.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is I think people will come back to the office if they haven't already, and I think that their office will look different in the future. But I mean, I guess what I'd really like to see is the traditional landlord-tenant relationship change to being one of a service provider relationship, and actually the feeling that someone perhaps doesn't feel as though they're renting a space in a particular physical property. They're actually joining a partnership with a service provider. So, for example, you might then see if you need to move space within the portfolio that service provider has, you've got more. You're not fixed. It's not a one single transaction. You're just joining into that partnership that we're talking about. And I think that, to be fair, that a lot of that is already happening, but it needs to continue.
And I think that's another observation we did see coming out last time, that maybe that is actually a potential use for the secondary and tertiary space as being the flex accommodation. So thank you very much indeed for another point very well made. Well, that does conclude our hour. So if those of you do need to drop off on the 5 o'clock, sorry, I've got 1 minute over at the moment. we will say goodbye to you now, but if you're able to stick around and join us for an open part of the debate for the next 30 minutes or so, then please do. But a huge thank you to our panelists. Heard some wonderful things this afternoon. I love the little drops of heaven. So I'm very much looking to seeing more of those in the offices that I'm visiting in the near future. Right. Who would like to thank you very much, Tahira? And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Tahira.
Bye.
Who would like to open us up? Who's got a question for us?
Steve, if no one's willing to be brave, I spotted on Twitter, I think it was last week, a small employer who had worked out that they wanted to be in a building, let's say 2 or 3 days a week. They didn't seem to have a bell curve problem. And they were actively looking for another business with whom to partner for office space. So let's say company A has the office on Mondays and Tuesdays and company B has it on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I wonder whether either the panelists or anybody in the wider community here has a view on whether that's something that we're likely to see a lot more of.
If I may, I'm happy to kind of pick this up. I mean, you know, in terms of is it something we're likely to see more of? I don't know, but as an occupier, and if I was considering that as an option, my questions or concerns with that setup would be, how would I be able to showcase my culture and my brand if I'm sharing the space with somebody else? And so much of that goes into those little bits of heaven that Tahira was talking about in terms of our furniture choices or our carpet finish or whatever it may be that reflects our brand. How would that get diluted, or would that have to get diluted if that was a model we were going for? And then whether that was palatable.
And that's so right. I know we have some flex office space in our building at 5 Chancery Lane, and one of the discussions that took up a lot of time and a lot of passion when that started was around our branding in our reception area. Not just the branding, which were then our firm colours, but also the literature that we have around the office, and how do we keep it as being our office while still being an office that our flex occupiers could have their own clients into, and it'd also be their office. It was quite an emotional discussion.
Along with compliance and regulations, and then info security and firewalls and all those things. So, sorry, I feel like I'm a beacon of problem, but on that one,
I think it's something that leases do need to address there going forward, because I think with the co-working model and different ways of occupying space, I think you're going to see occupiers wanting to share with associated companies or possibly companies, client businesses, people that they're working with more and more. So the traditional sort of group sharing, you know, provisions and that sort of thing, I think are probably a little bit out of date now. And I think you're going to see much more fluidity in terms of who actually occupies space. And I think, you know, occupiers will want a bit more flexibility to bring other people in. And I think it possibly a challenge for the legal profession, but it's a tricky one. But I think the way in which people are sharing now with other people has changed completely.
Simon, if I can come in there, we've been seeing in leases, obviously group sharing has been around for years, but for about 10 to 15 years, we've been seeing the ability to share with business associates who are not necessarily group companies. And some landlords require some sort of bona fide relationship there. They want to see an evidence of a contract. But I think going forwards, we're going to move to a situation where people want to be able to share with companies who are not related, are not group companies, they're not business associates.
Yeah.
And I suppose what we'll see is landlords initially, when they were very suspicious about business associates, and so the way they got around that was to limit it to how many such arrangements could be accommodated, or they might limit it to 10% of the premises or whatever, because they were worried about issues like granting security of tenure, and they're probably thinking, well, if we're going to have a problem, let's limit it to 10% of the premises, not the whole floor or the whole building. And I suppose just as there was some suspicion over group sharing arrangements and business associates, there will be some suspicion against licenses to occupy with unrelated companies, and maybe we'll start seeing it happening, but there will be some restrictions around that until the market accepts it as being normal and more comfortable. I don't think it's the lawyers, Simon. I don't think it's the lawyers. I think it's all about policing it and making sure that it's clear as to what it means, and the fact that you can't give exclusive possession, and making sure that these arrangements are very casual and are moved around the building. There are protocols that could be put in place, and it could be managed very well, so that there isn't an issue for landlords.
Thank you, Rachel. Mark Breen, you had your hand up there, sir.
I did to comment. So I run some flexible offices, and I wanted to comment on the total impracticality. I agree with Tahira about people sharing an actual office. Some days a week, particularly with COVID, you've got a tremendous cleaning, regime to carry out in between each occupation. Plus, we have several products like a hot desk and a fixed desk. A fixed desk is where it's your desk. You can leave your computer behind. You have a locker. You leave your possessions. A hot desk, you can work wherever you want, and then you've got to take everything away at the end of the day. So 2 different companies sharing the same room or office on and off through days, I think is completely impractical. But what we are seeing is companies trying to reduce costs by maybe saying half of my workforce will work from home for part-time of the week, and vice versa, so in different teams. So can we take an office for, say, 30 people, but can we have 45 or 50 keys? So 45 people will share their own office, but it's within one company. Yeah. And that allows very successfully, within a company, having maybe less space, saving money, and accommodating the new hybrid, which undoubtedly will come, where people will work from home 1 or 2 days a week, or 2 to 3 days a week, undoubtedly. So that kind of thing will happen. But I don't think sharing office is practical at all.
I absolutely, in terms of the desk sharing, I think that's inevitable. But it does, of course, still leave us with the bell curve problem. And what do you do on, let's say, a Wednesday when the business wants and the individual employees all want to be in the office, not on a Monday or Friday? Patrick, I saw that you had a comment in the chat around how a 3-day weekend might help with that. How does it work?
Are you asking me to answer my question?
I am, absolutely.
Oh, well, I have no idea, I'm afraid. But I have seen that some companies have been trialing it recently, and productivity has gone up, engagement has gone up, and it obviously helps the hospitality sector, because you can use your Friday or your Monday to go to the pub or go to a restaurant. So I just my question for the panelists is, do they see that becoming more widespread? Do they see it as a viable alternative, or do you think it's just sort of pie in the sky and a bit faddy?
Can I just ask a clarification on that question, Patrick? Which is, actually, are we talking about people working a 4-day week as opposed to a 5-day week, or are we talking? We are. Yes. So it's a reduction in the working week to 4 days.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Can I ask what happens to the wages? Did it get paid?
That's where I was leaning, Mark. That's where I was.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because we've had that discussion even in our own small organisation, and I think we're trying to move to a situation where we worry about what people are doing, not where they are, and what their productivity is. And I think the traditional 5-day, if you're accepting that, mobile working and home working, or in whatever form it takes, then you're going into a much more trusting situation where you've got to trust your workforce. And one of my partners said to me, we were talking about a situation, and he said, well, if we don't trust people, we shouldn't have employed them in the first place. And I thought it was quite an interesting way of looking at it. And I think it then, depending, obviously there's various different kinds of roles, but if the working week was to become 4 days, I mean, I think you could argue in a lot of people, in a lot of industries, perhaps it's 4.5 days already. So is it that dramatic a shift? Does it matter? I don't think so. And I think, personally, I don't see much legs in models where people are trying to rotate people into offices on alternate days. I think, you want your workforce together to collaborate, so you want them in that group in the Tuesdays, Wednesdays, whenever it is. And I think if you had a shortening of the week, I think people would do 4 days, 5 days work in 4 days. I don't think productivity would go down. I think it would just be it'd be very interesting. I know it's been done in Denmark and a few other places, but it wouldn't terrify me at all if that happened. I don't see it. And as far as people renting offices is concerned, it doesn't really change the model.
No, it's a shame we've lost Tahira actually at this point, because my understanding, I don't know whether anybody ever read A Year of Living Danishly. My understanding of the way Lego and other companies in Denmark, as you mentioned, Simon, work is they do work shorter hours, and they see their staff as being more productive as a result. I suppose from a lawyer's perspective on that, as in a service provider as opposed to someone advising on employment contracts, our clients expect us to be available as a minimum 5 days a week, and probably more like 7. And the difficulty is if all of a sudden individual law firms, individual businesses suddenly say we're going to have a 3-day weekend. Our clients don't work that way. And I think we're always going to struggle that. You can be as productive as you like on the 4 days that you're working, but inevitably there are always going to be at least 4 meetings on the day that you're taking as your extra day of weekend.
Yeah, I think Claire, I agree with you, and I have a take on this which is a bit different, because I work across time zones, so across Europe, Middle East, Africa regions, and Asia sometimes. So being in the UK puts us in a unique position where you're in a time zone that's convenient for many other. And Tahira, you're nodding, you probably know this. So if you are in a position where you're not working on some days, you see the Middle East doesn't work on a Friday or a Thursday. So if you decide to take a 3-day weekend, there is very little overlap with the rest of the world. So if you are positioning yourself as a global player, it will be very difficult if you go to a 4-day working week. And the other point that I had is I from the bigger clients that I work with, especially the tech, especially in London, lots of them are way ahead of the curve in terms of fitting out their space in an agile way. So there are aggressive desk sharing ratios, etc., etc. But even then, if they look at their utilization data at peak, with a 1:3 ratio, they're probably at 65-70%. Mm-hmm. So what do we need to flatten the peak? We don't really know.
I think you actually make a really good point on that, Gertrude. We did some research inside Cornet last year. In fact, it was published in the middle of it. In fact, it was 2019 research, but peak occupancy, or full occupancy as it was described by most people, was actually 72%. So actually there's a fair bit more capacity to be wrung out of buildings before people need to start going to the aggressive tactics of the way that reduction is going to work. The other thing I can say is, with my workplace consultancy hat on, is that where we've seen space reduction being part of an early strategy, that coupled with agility, we've actually found a new term which we've defined, which is forced agility or determined agility, because it actually tells people the days they can be agile. So if you're getting to that point, it actually counteracts the very term agile working that you're setting out to achieve in the first place. So there's a number of things, I think, which are maybe counterintuitive in this, that what people believe and what the reality are as the starting points are two very different things.
Yeah, I mean that's like saying you can work from home 2 days a week so long as they're neither Monday or Friday.
Absolutely.
That will flatten the bell.
Yep.
And I don't know, it's not a bad idea. I mean, before the pandemic, a lot of my staff they live far out, so they used to do a Friday at home anyway. And it's back to whoever made the point about trust. Some of them I knew were working, and others I probably suspected didn't do much. So
I think one of the big issues we've got at the moment is slightly unexpectedly is commuting. I think the what's happened is made people look at the cost of commuting in a completely different way, and I think that's actually one of the barriers to people coming in at the moment.
Yeah.
So perversely, I mean, I used to buy a season ticket at the beginning of the year and then forget about it and until the next year's bill came around. But now everyone's buying individual tickets and all sorts of things, and they're thinking how much they're saving by being at home. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed, either in terms of getting the ticketing right or getting the cost down. But I think it's an unexpected reason, I think, that's preventing a lot of people coming to work. You can create the best environment and whatever else, but if people think they're going to save £50 every day they don't come in, that's going to have an effect. And I think the government did a good job of scaring people off public transport early on in the pandemic, and I think there's a lot of work to do in that sphere, which isn't something that I hear much talked about, really.
But I think you're right, Sam. I think that's what the transport companies, they've got to respond to that. We're all talking about how our workplaces are going to respond to this, how the transport companies going to, and how the government going to work with the transport companies to respond to this.
Absolutely. Certainly, we had discussions within our real estate team last year around how people wanted to work once we can go back into the office. And one of the comments that I had back was dictated by how the season ticket discounts work. That it doesn't make any sense for me to come in 2 days a week. I need to come in 3 for the season ticket pricing to work, or something like that. They do need to respond to this, I think, and think a little bit more creatively.
I think there is another angle to this, which is probably taking this to the next extent. But when you get into the point of people actually saying, do you know what, I think I can work remotely full time, and they're in a London-centric job, do they still get London waiting to help them pay for the season ticket that they had to pay for before? This is something that in another piece of research I was doing in Silicon Valley, and this was looking at where the tech staff are moving to, because it's so damn expensive to live there. They could buy a ranch in Texas for the same price as they could get a 3-bedroom apartment in Silicon Valley. But then the big employers are saying, hey, do you know what? You don't live in state anymore. You don't have the costs. Therefore, we're going to cut your salary. You don't need that amount of money. So, people need to be pretty hard, think pretty hard before they ask the genie for that special prize at the moment, or they need to look at the implications.
And that job could get exported abroad as well to, India and places where they already are. I mean, if you got a problem with your Mac, you ring up somebody, you talk variously to somebody in Greece or in Portugal or in India or in Ireland.
Precisely that, Mark. Precisely that.
Yeah. Big challenges ahead.
Very much so. I know that certainly for a number of national businesses where there is already a wage differential across different offices, that is something that's being actively discussed. It is a big concern because employers are worrying about the fairness perception from their a Newcastle or Birmingham office.
But that also might drive the desire for employees to actually come into the office, presenteeism, to be seen to be there, and therefore, I think that's going to be a very powerful urge as well. I think people are nervous I don't know if any of you have experienced a Zoom meeting where some of you are in a boardroom together and the other half are actually on the Zoom working from home. Those who are on the Zoom distant are way disadvantaged compared to the rapport that people who are in the same room are having. So all that kind of thing is going to play on people's psyche, and actually there are very real concerns.
Yeah, I think there are ways you can deal with that, though. I know Steve had chaired a Cornet session that I attended pre-lockdown, and one of the suggestions in that for that sort of scenario where you're part in, part out, is that actually the chair of the meeting was out of the office. Even if they were present in the physical office, they took themselves off to a separate room so that the chair was remote.
Yeah.
Just to avoid that whole thing of it's us and there's them. And apparently that works quite well. Yet to trial it, but I'm told it works well.
We're seeing that in a number of organisations now where they're insisting on one format or the other. That if you've got 10 people in a meeting, 8 of them happen to be in the office, but 2 are remote, then you use a remote format to run the meeting because it's equitable, and it means that you don't get the walk out of the room together with people chatting on about what's just happened in the meeting. And the other part, I think, Mark, you to pick up, you've just touched on something else, which is FOMO. And there is a real angle now coming into this, which is when you're seeing the senior leadership inside an organisation being present in the office and stating their intent to be present, and you are not present, is that affecting your career? Is it actually showing a lack of commitment? And people are starting to worry about this, and it's not necessarily fear of missing out so much as fear of not being visible, I think, in a lot of ways. That we're starting to learn some other intrinsic human behaviours that are probably lodged deep within us all, but are driving and playing on these fears as we go forward. So this is why I believe also that the learning is just about to start. There's a lot more ways in which this is going to play out.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions from those of us still on the call? We can see you.
We can indeed.
Maybe I could offer.
Ian.
I was going to offer Neil my shaver.
I was just going to point out.
Relax, Mark. Relax, Mark. I'm taking a holiday. I'm working from home.
Exactly.
I was just going to make a point about something slightly different, but completely keyed in with the debate and what we've been talking about this afternoon. There was a Dragon's Den on the other week where one of the entrepreneurs came into the room and did his whole pitch about technology in a very specific way of which he would offer money back for people that shared their cookies and everything that was online. And all 5 of the entrepreneurs came in with the fact that they were all wanted a part of it, apart from one, because she certainly wasn't able to support them in the way they needed to. But the clincher of the deal wasn't the 60 or 70 grand that they were going to invest in the business. It was actually Suki Tollerman saying that he would come back and he would offer them a year's worth of office space for 8 of them to be entrepreneurial because he believed in them so much. Yeah. And I believe that actually won that over more than anything else. The money didn't matter. It was the investment in the personalities and the people coming to work with him that made that deal happen. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. It's how do you make that desire? How do you make people worth what they are worth?
Yeah. Ian, it's right. Yeah, I think Ian, it's right. It's about how Suki Solomon made that entrepreneur feel, and that's exactly what it was, which was Sadir mentioned earlier about the human thing, and it was that it made him feel special.
It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, seeing human interaction about an office space. It wasn't about the deal at all. It was about the personalities, and that was phenomenal in that show.
That's why I love what I do. Well, we all love what we do because we absolutely have got the power, if that, without sounding grand here, but I really do. I mean, it's the workplace is such an enabler, or physical space is such an enabler on how you're going to feel or how you can make somebody feel.
So from my part then, I would like the office to feel like a boutique hotel with a really beautiful suite upstairs, so that if I'm working late, I can stay the night if I want to. With the spa, somewhere to do yoga. This is from someone who doesn't do yoga, but I think I might do it if it was in the building. But I mean, it's got to. I mean, I'm looking out of the window now. I can see wildlife. I can see blue sky. Well, it's not blue now, but it was blue sky. I can see trees and plants, and I'm going to really miss that. coming back into the office.
But Rachel, there are so many other things about London and about being in the office that we all miss. I miss seeing my colleagues and being able to stand around the kettle making a cup of tea and chatting about either a work problem or what they've been up to or how this went or our worries about how it's going to go. We miss all of that. If there is a new case about something, we don't get to talk about it. And you talk about the fabulous hotels, etc. We talked earlier about partnering with the local spaces and using that. I'm terribly excited. We've got the new Nomad London opening up around the corner in next, where are we? April next month, and we'll be able to use those fabulous spaces. I look out of my window and see countryside, but there's in a small village in Surrey, there isn't much in the way of culture. There are no museums, there are no art galleries, there's no theatre.
No, that's where the combination works, I think. Someone said to me, they said, it needs to become a choice rather than an obligation. And I think that kind of sums it up. We're already back to almost 4 days a week because we have to physically inspect property and show people around and that sort of thing. We've probably got more reason to be in town than anyone. But I've found the difference is it's quite nice having a couple of days, then having 1 day at home to catch up on everything. Because normally I can't get done during the working day what I want to get done because I'm just responding to what other people want all the time. So actually having a bit of a balance has been really interesting. But the social aspect of being back in town and meeting up with everyone else is enormous. I don't think we're all designed to sit at home on our own. It's great occasionally, but it's about having a choice, personal choice.
After 13 months, it's wearing a little thin.
Well, by far the biggest impediment is the commute. If you could, instead of walking from your bedroom to your study, you could walk from your bedroom to the office, everybody would be back.
Yeah, but I think even then, it sounds terrible, but some of us actually quite enjoy it because it's like a sort of mental break every day.
Agreed.
And it's been, we used to think we hated the commute, but actually a lot of people have realised that actually it's a bit of their own time to think, which you don't get when you're, the moment you walk in the office, it's kind of,
Your phone can't ring on the tube, can it?
No. Oh, it can do going forward, can't it?
Oh, yeah, damn,
That's coming. Yeah.
Okay, 17:29. So I'm going to move us to wrap up. Now, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Another fascinating debate today. I've been really enthused to see where this would actually go in terms of pulling together both sides of the argument. And I don't think we actually ended up with an argument. I think probably when we conceived the event, we did think it would be the 10-rounder in session 3 today, with people from one side telling us what they wanted or were demanding, and others telling us why they couldn't have it. But it seems it's been a far more conducive process all the way through this, with a marriage between the desires and the provision coming together in a very holistic way. I've learned so much during this process. I've heard some wonderful phrases, which I'm going to steal and plagiarise intolerably for the next few weeks. It's been a great experience for all of us. So we will be taking this, as I said earlier on at the beginning, and turning it into a white paper, which we will be circulating out to everyone who's joined and making that more available generally to all of our colleagues across the commercial workplace and market sector. It just remains me to thank today's panelists again. So to Gayatri, to Tahira, to Simon, and also to Sudhir, who had to go slightly early. I'll pass over to Claire and to Rachel, who are both still with us, for their final words, but thank you very much indeed from me.
Thanks, Steve. Very little in terms of final words. It's been a really great series. Getting feedback on these things is always interesting, but I've been blown away by how many people have said that they've learned something new. There are so many sessions on workplace at the moment, but people are telling us that we've had some different views. We've made them think about things differently, and that was our aim, really. And in the white paper, hopefully to put forward some ideas on best practice. Thanks for joining us, particularly those of you who have attended all 3 sessions. Thanks for staying the journey. And we look forward to your feedback on the white paper in due course. And thanks so much to all of our panelists. We couldn't have done this without you. You have been amazing. Thank you.